The screams of the dying man echoed through the barn as Kira Montgomery pressed her small hands against the wound. But there was too much blood, far too much, and at 8 years old she could only watch as the light faded from her father's eyes while the outlaws rode away with everything her family had ever owned. The year was 1868, and Amarillo, Texas was barely more than a collection of wooden buildings scattered across the flat prairie like dice thrown by an indifferent god. Kira's mother had died bringing her into this world, and now her father lay still in the hay, his final breath rattling in his chest as the horses in their stalls stamped nervously, sensing death in their midst. The child sat beside the body until dawn broke across the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of blood orange and gold, colors that would forever remind her of this night. When the neighbors found her the next morning, she was sitting cross-legged in the dirt, her dress stained dark, her eyes vacant. The Wilson family took her in out of Christian duty, but Martha Wilson made it clear from the first day that Kira was a burden, another mouth to feed in a household already stretched thin. They put her to work immediately, and the barn became her refuge, the only place where she felt at peace among the animals who did not judge her, did not whisper about the wild child who preferred horses to people. 10 years passed in a blur of hard work and harder words. Kira grew tall and strong, her hands calloused from labor, her manners non-existent by the standards of proper society. She ate with her fingers when she thought no one was watching, spoke bluntly without the simpering politeness expected of young women, and spent more time in the stables than in the house. The other girls in town whispered behind their fans. Their mothers pulled them away when Kira walked past, and the young men looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "She's got no manners, raised in a barn," Mrs. Henderson declared loudly one Sunday after church, her voice carrying across the dusty street. "That girl is 18 years old and acts like a savage. Martha Wilson should be ashamed, letting her run wild like that." Kira heard every word. She always did. But she had learned long ago that defending herself only made things worse, so she kept her head down and continued toward the general store, her list of supplies clutched in one hand. The Wilson family had sent her to town alone, as they often did, preferring not to be seen with her in public. She did not mind. The solitude suited her better than forced pleasantries and fake smiles. The general store was crowded that afternoon, full of ranchers stocking up before the long ride back to their homesteads. Kira waited patiently by the counter, knowing Mr. Peterson would serve everyone else first, as he always did. She studied the jars of candy on the shelf, remembering dimly a time when her father had bought her peppermint sticks, back when she still believed the world was a kind place. "You gonna stand there all day blocking the way, or you gonna move?" a sharp voice demanded. Kira turned to find Beatrice Caldwell glaring at her, all blonde ringlets and perfect posture, everything Kira was not and never would be. Behind Beatrice stood 3 other young women from prominent families, their expressions ranging from amused to contemptuous. "I'm waiting my turn," Kira said simply, her voice rougher than she intended. Years of shouting over livestock had deepened her tone, made it unfeminine. "Your turn?" Beatrice laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Girls like you don't get turns. You get what's left over, if anything." Something hot and angry flared in Kira's chest, but she swallowed it down. She had learned to swallow a lot of things. Instead, she stepped aside, pressing herself against the shelves to let Beatrice and her friends pass. They swept by in a rustle of skirts and perfume, and Kira caught fragments of their whispered conversation. "Did you see how she just stood there? Like an animal. I heard she sleeps in the barn sometimes. My mother says she'll never find a husband, not with that wild look in her eyes." Kira waited until they had made their purchases and left before approaching the counter. Mr. Peterson sighed heavily, as if serving her was the greatest burden of his day, but he filled her order without comment. She paid with the coins Martha Wilson had given her, counting them out carefully, aware that any mistake would be blamed on her stupidity rather than an honest error. The walk back to the Wilson ranch took an hour, and Kira used the time to think about her future, which seemed to stretch before her like the endless Texas prairie, flat and unchanging. She was 18 now, technically old enough to strike out on her own, but she had no money, no skills beyond farm work, and nowhere to go. The Wilson family would keep her as long as she was useful. And then what? She tried not to think about it too hard. When she arrived at the ranch, she found Martha Wilson waiting on the porch, her arms crossed, her face pinched with displeasure. Kira's stomach sank. She recognized that look. "Where have you been?" Martha demanded. "You should have been back an hour ago." "The store was crowded," Kira explained, setting down the heavy bags. "I had to wait." "Excuses," Martha snapped. "Always excuses with you. Get those supplies put away and then muck out the stalls, and don't think you're eating dinner until every chore is done. I'm tired of your laziness." Kira had not been lazy a day in her life, but arguing was pointless. She picked up the bags and carried them inside, moving mechanically through the familiar motions of putting things away. Through the window, she could see the Wilson children playing in the yard, their laughter bright and careless. She had never been allowed to play, not even when she first arrived. Work was her purpose, her only value. That night, after the chores were finally done and the family had eaten their fill, Martha brought Kira a plate of cold leftovers and set it on the kitchen table without a word. Kira ate quickly, standing up, her exhausted body craving fuel. When she finished, she washed her plate and slipped out to the barn, where she had made a small nest in the hayloft, a place that felt more like home than any room in the house ever had. She lay in the darkness, listening to the gentle sounds of the horses below, and allowed herself to cry. Not for long, just a few minutes to release the pressure building in her chest, and then she wiped her eyes and stared up at the wooden rafters. Tomorrow would be the same as today, and the day after that, and the day after that, stretching into an endless string of identical moments until she died or disappeared, forgotten by everyone who had ever known her name. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, a stranger rode into Amarillo on a horse that looked like it had been carved from midnight itself. The animal was massive, its coat black as coal, its eyes intelligent and calm despite the chaos of the town's main street. But it was the rider who drew every eye, who made conversations stop mid-sentence and caused even the boldest men to step aside. He was a mountain of a man, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves, tied back with a strip of leather, and his face was all sharp angles and hard planes, weathered by wind and sun. His arms, visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, were thick with muscle, corded and powerful. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt that strained across his chest, and at his hip hung a knife that looked like it could fell a tree. This was Owen Blackthorne, though no one in Amarillo knew his name yet. He was a legend in the mountains north of Texas, a man who lived alone in the wilderness, who trapped and hunted and wanted nothing to do with civilization. But he needed supplies, and Amarillo was the nearest town, so here he was, enduring the stares and whispers with the patience of a man who had long ago stopped caring what others thought. He dismounted in front of the general store, his movements fluid despite his size, and tied his horse to the rail. The animal would wait there without moving, trained to perfection. Owen pushed through the door, ducking slightly to clear the frame, and the customers inside fell silent, watching this giant navigate their small-town world. Kira was in the store again that day, having been sent by Martha to purchase thread and buttons. She stood near the back, hoping to avoid attention, but when Owen entered, she found herself staring like everyone else. There was something about him, something wild and untamed that called to the part of her that had never quite fit into civilized society. He moved like a predator, all controlled power and coiled strength, and when his eyes swept the room, she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. Their eyes met for just a moment, and Kira felt her breath catch. His eyes were pale gray, the color of storm clouds, and they seemed to see right through her, past all the layers of protection she had built up over the years. Then he looked away, turning his attention to Mr. Peterson behind the counter, and Kira released the breath she'd been holding. "I need supplies," Owen said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. I have a list." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the counter. Mr. Peterson picked it up with trembling fingers, his eyes darting between the list and the imposing figure before him. "Yes, sir, of course, sir," Mr. Peterson stammered. "I'll get this together right away." While Mr. Peterson scurried around gathering items, Owen stood perfectly still, his presence dominating the space. Kira tried not to stare, but it was impossible. She had never seen anyone like him, had never felt this strange pull toward another person. It frightened her and thrilled her in equal measure. "You gonna buy something or just stand there gawking?" The harsh voice belonged to Mrs. Henderson, who had appeared beside Kira with her usual disapproving expression. Kira flushed, embarrassed to be caught staring, and quickly grabbed the thread and buttons she had come for. She approached the counter, waiting for Mr. Peterson to finish with Owen, but the store owner ignored her completely, focused entirely on his intimidating customer. "Excuse me," Kira said quietly, holding out her items. No one responded. Mr. Peterson continued packing Owen's supplies, and the other customers began discussing the stranger in loud whispers, as if Kira were invisible. She was used to being overlooked, but today it stung more than usual, perhaps because she was acutely aware of Owen standing just a few feet away, perhaps because some small part of her wanted him to notice her. "The lady is waiting," Owen said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. Everyone froze. Mr. Peterson looked up, confused, following Owen's gaze to Kira. The store owner's expression soured. "She can wait until I'm done with you, sir," Mr. Peterson said, trying to sound polite, but failing to hide his irritation. "She was here first," Owen observed, his tone neutral, but his eyes hard. "Seems fair to help her while you're getting my things together." It was not a suggestion. Mr. Peterson swallowed hard and nodded, reaching for Kira's thread and buttons with obvious reluctance. He wrapped them quickly, named a price, and practically threw the package at her when she paid. Kira mumbled her thanks and turned to leave, her heart pounding. She had almost reached the door when Owen spoke again. "You forgot your change." Kira turned back to find him holding out 2 coins, which Mr. Peterson had apparently kept for himself, a common practice when dealing with Kira. She hesitated, unsure whether to make a scene by taking them, but Owen stepped forward and pressed the coins into her palm. His hand was rough and warm, and the brief contact sent a shock through her entire body. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once, a slight dip of his head, and released her hand. Kira fled the store, her face burning, her heart racing. She had no idea why a simple kindness affected her so strongly, but she could not stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, like she was a person worth defending, worth noticing. No one had looked at her that way in 10 years. She walked back to the Wilson Ranch in a daze, replaying the encounter over and over in her mind. By the time she arrived, she had convinced herself it meant nothing, that he was just a decent man who would never give her another thought. But that night, lying in the hayloft, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where someone as strong and capable as Owen Blackthorne might see value in a rough, mannerless girl raised in a barn. The next morning, Martha Wilson announced that Kira would be accompanying her to the town social that Saturday. Kira's stomach dropped. The socials were torture, hours of standing against the wall while everyone else danced and laughed, knowing she did not belong. But Martha insisted, claiming it looked bad for the family if Kira did not make an effort to be sociable. Saturday arrived too quickly. Martha forced Kira into her least worn dress, a faded blue thing that had belonged to one of the Wilson daughters and fit poorly. She tried to tame Kira's long brown hair, which had a mind of its own, and gave up after a few frustrated minutes, settling for pulling it back severely from her face. In the mirror, Kira looked like a prisoner dressed for execution. The social was held in the church hall, decorated with bunting and lanterns, full of music and noise. Kira found her usual spot along the wall and tried to make herself small. The evening dragged on endlessly, and she counted the minutes until she could leave. Then the door opened, and Owen Blackthorne walked in. A hush fell over the room. No one had expected the mountain man to attend a social gathering. He looked distinctly uncomfortable, his massive frame too large for the delicate space, but he moved to the refreshment table and poured himself a cup of punch, ignoring the stares. Kira watched him from across the room, her pulse quickening. He looked even more imposing in the lantern light, his features cast in shadow and gold. She wondered what had brought him here, whether he was lonely in his mountain solitude, whether he regretted coming. As if sensing her gaze, Owen looked up and their eyes met again. This time, he did not look away. He set down his cup and began walking toward her, and Kira's heart nearly stopped. Every eye in the room followed his progress, and when he stopped directly in front of her, the whispers began in earnest. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his deep voice sending shivers down her spine. Kira stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Would you like to dance? He repeated patiently. With me? She almost laughed. She barely knew how to dance, had never been asked before, had no idea why this stranger would single her out. But something in his steady gaze told her he was serious, that he genuinely wanted her answer. I don't know how, she admitted, her voice low so others would not hear. Neither do I, he said, and the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Guess we'll figure it out together. He held out his hand, large and calloused and strong, and Kira found herself reaching for it without conscious thought. His fingers closed around hers, warm and secure, and he led her to the center of the floor. The other dancers moved aside, creating space, their faces shocked and scandalized. Owen placed one hand on her waist, held her other hand in his, and began moving to the music. He was right. He did not know the steps, but he had natural rhythm and enough confidence to make up for his lack of training. Kira followed his lead, stumbling occasionally, but he steadied her each time, his strength reassuring. Why did you ask me? She whispered, aware of the dozens of eyes watching them. Why not? He replied simply. You looked like you could use a friend. I'm nobody, Kira said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. I'm just the girl they talk about, the one with no manners who was raised in a barn. Owen's hand tightened slightly on her waist, not painfully, but firmly. You're somebody to me. 4 words. 4 simple words. And Kira felt something crack open inside her chest, some frozen place that had been locked away since her father died. She blinked back tears, refusing to cry in front of all these people, but Owen saw them anyway. His expression softened, just barely, and he pulled her a fraction closer. Don't let them make you small, he said quietly. You're worth 10 of anyone in this room. The song ended too soon. Kira reluctantly released his hand, expecting him to walk away now that his charitable duty was done, but Owen remained by her side. When the next song started, he asked her to dance again, and then again. By the 4th dance, the scandalized whispers had reached a fever pitch, but Owen seemed completely unconcerned, focused entirely on Kira. Martha Wilson finally intervened, marching across the floor with fury written across her face. That's quite enough, she announced loudly. Kira, we're leaving, now. Kira opened her mouth to protest, but years of obedience were hard to break. She started to follow Martha, but Owen's voice stopped her. She's not a child, he said calmly. She can decide for herself whether she wants to leave. Martha spun to face him, her eyes blazing. How dare you? You don't know anything about this situation. She's my responsibility, and I say when she leaves. Is that true? Owen asked, looking at Kira. Are you her responsibility? Kira hesitated. Legally, she supposed Martha had some claim on her, though she was 18 and should be free to make her own choices. But where would she go? What would she do? Fear and habit warred with the sudden desperate desire to be free. I'm an adult, Kira said slowly, testing the words. I can make my own decisions. Martha's face turned an alarming shade of red. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By embarrassing us in front of the whole town? I've worked for you every day for 10 years, Kira said, her voice gaining strength. I've earned my keep 100 times over. You don't own me. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this confrontation with rapt attention, and Kira knew there would be no going back from this moment. She had just burned the only bridge she had. Martha drew herself up to her full height, which was still considerably shorter than either Kira or Owen. Fine, she spat. If that's how you feel, then don't bother coming back. You're not welcome on my property anymore. She stormed out, leaving Kira standing in the middle of the church hall with nowhere to go and nothing to her name except the worn dress on her back. The reality of what she had just done crashed over her like a wave, and she swayed slightly, suddenly dizzy. Owen's hand found her elbow, steadying her. Easy, he murmured. Breathe. Kira sucked in air, trying to calm her racing heart. Around them, the whispers had started again, gleeful and vicious. This would be the talk of the town for months, maybe years. The girl raised in a barn had finally shown her true colors, had thrown away a good Christian home for a stranger, would probably end up dead in a ditch somewhere. I need to leave, Kira said desperately. I need to get out of here. Owen nodded and guided her toward the door, his large frame clearing a path through the crowd. They emerged into the cool night air, and Kira gulped it down gratefully, her head spinning. What had she done? What was she going to do now? "Where will you go?" Owen asked, his voice gentle despite his rough appearance. "I don't know," Kira admitted. "I don't have anywhere." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. Then he said, "Come with me." Kira laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Come with you where?" "To my cabin, in the mountains." He said it like it was the most natural thing in the world, like inviting a strange girl to live with him in the wilderness was perfectly reasonable. "I could use help around the place, and you clearly need somewhere safe. It's not much, but it's shelter and food, and no one to tell you that you're not good enough." "You don't even know me," Kira protested weakly. "I know enough," Owen replied. "I know you're strong. I know you've survived things that would have broken most people. I know you're kind to animals and honest to a fault. That's enough." Kira wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. The idea of escaping Amarillo, of leaving behind all the judgment and cruelty, was intoxicating. But what if he was dangerous? What if this was a terrible mistake? As if reading her mind, Owen said, "I won't hurt you. You'll have your own space, your own bed. I'll teach you how to survive in the mountains, how to trap and hunt and live free. And if you decide you want to leave, I'll bring you back to town, no questions asked. But I think maybe we could help each other." There was something in his eyes, a loneliness that mirrored her own, and Kira realized he was not just offering her refuge. He was asking for companionship, for someone to share his solitary existence. He was just as alone as she was, perhaps more so. "Okay," Kira said, the word escaping before she could second-guess herself. "I'll come with you." Owen's shoulders relaxed slightly, tension she had not noticed easing from his frame. "Get whatever you need from the ranch. I'll wait here with the horses." "I don't have anything," Kira admitted. "Everything I own is on my back." Something like anger flashed in Owen's eyes, but it was not directed at her. "Then we'll get you what you need, tomorrow. Tonight, we ride." He helped her onto his massive black horse, then swung up behind her with easy grace despite his size. Kira had ridden plenty of horses in her life, but never like this, pressed against a man's solid chest, surrounded by warmth and the scent of leather and pine. Owen's arms came around her to hold the reins, and she felt safer than she had in 10 years. They rode out of Amarillo as the moon rose high and bright, leaving behind the only life Kira had ever known. She did not look back. There was nothing worth looking at. The journey to Owen's cabin took 2 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. They traveled mostly in silence, stopping only to rest the horse and eat the dried meat and hardtack Owen carried in his saddlebags. At night, Owen made camp with practiced efficiency, building a fire and setting up a bedroll for Kira while he took the first watch, his rifle across his knees. "You should sleep," Kira said on the second night, watching him from her blankets. "You've been awake for hours." "I'm used to it," Owen replied, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. "Besides, I want you to feel safe." "I do feel safe," Kira said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Safer than I have in a long time." Owen glanced at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "Good. That's how it should be." They reached the cabin on the afternoon of the third day, and Kira's first glimpse of it took her breath away. It was situated in a clearing surrounded by towering pines, with a stream running nearby and mountains rising in the distance. The cabin itself was solidly built from logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. Behind it stood a small barn and a corral where several horses grazed peacefully. "You built all this?" Kira asked, awed. "Over the years," Owen confirmed, dismounting and helping her down. "It's not fancy, but it's home." Inside, the cabin was simple but well maintained. One large room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A ladder led to a loft above, and Kira could see a bed up there through the railings. On the main floor, tucked into a corner, was another smaller bed with a partition that could be drawn for privacy. "That's yours," Owen said, nodding toward the smaller bed. "I'll take the loft. You'll have privacy down here." Kira set down the small pack Owen had purchased for her in the last town they had passed through, containing a few changes of clothes and basic necessities. She turned to face him, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened in the past 3 days. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Really? What do you want from me?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes serious. "I've been alone for 5 years," he said finally. "By choice, mostly. People down in the towns, they look at me and see a savage, something to be feared or mocked. I got tired of it, so I left. Built this place, made a life where I didn't have to deal with their judgment anymore. But loneliness is its own kind of death, slow and quiet. When I saw you in that store, being ignored and mistreated, I recognized something. We're the same, you and I. Outcasts. And I thought maybe we could be outcasts together, keep each other from disappearing completely." Tears spilled down Kira's cheeks before she could stop them. "I thought I was the only one who felt that way." "You're not," Owen said gently. "Not anymore." Over the following weeks, Kira settled into life in the mountains with surprising ease. Owen was patient and thorough in his teaching, showing her how to identify edible plants, how to set snares for rabbits, how to fish in the cold mountain streams. He taught her to shoot, placing his rifle in her hands and standing behind her to correct her stance, his presence warm and solid at her back. Kira absorbed everything hungrily, thrilled to finally be learning useful skills, to be treated like her mind and her abilities mattered. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. Owen told her about his life before the mountains, how he had worked as a blacksmith in a town further north, how his size and rough appearance had made people uncomfortable, how he had grown weary of being treated like a monster. Kira shared her own history, the few memories she had of her father, the long years with the Wilson family, the constant feeling of being wrong somehow, of not fitting. "You fit just fine," Owen said one night, his voice rough with emotion. "Anyone who couldn't see that was blind." As the days turned into weeks and then months, Kira found herself watching Owen with increasing fascination. The way his muscles flexed as he chopped wood, the concentration on his face as he repaired a broken harness, the gentleness in his hands when he tended to an injured animal. He was the most competent person she had ever met, capable of building or fixing or hunting anything they needed, and yet he never made her feel small or useless. Instead, he treated her like an equal, like her contributions mattered, like she had value beyond her ability to work. She was falling in love with him. The realization came one morning as she watched him emerge from the barn, his hair loose around his shoulders, his shirt clinging to his muscular frame. Her heart skipped in her chest, and she knew with sudden certainty that she would be happy spending the rest of her life in this clearing, with this man, far from civilization and its cruelties. But did he feel the same? Owen was always kind, always respectful, but he maintained a careful distance, never touching her unless necessary, never giving any indication that he saw her as more than a friend or a companion. Kira told herself it was enough, that she should be grateful for what she had. But the longing grew stronger with each passing day. Winter came early to the mountains that year. The first snow fell in late October, blanketing the world in white and making travel nearly impossible. Kira and Owen settled in for the long months ahead, their world shrinking to the cabin and the barn and the small cleared paths between them. They spent long evenings by the fire, Kira learning to sew buckskin while Owen carved wood or repaired tools, their silence comfortable and companionable. One night in early December, a fierce storm rolled in, bringing howling winds and temperatures so cold that frost formed on the inside of the windows. Kira huddled under her blankets, shivering despite the roaring fire. Owen descended from the loft, took one look at her, and shook his head. "You'll freeze down here," he said gruffly. "Come up to the loft, it's warmer, and we can share body heat." Kira's heart hammered. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure you'll die of cold if you stay down here," Owen replied practically. "Come on, I don't bite." She climbed the ladder with trembling hands, whether from cold or nerves she could not say. The loft was indeed warmer, the heat from the fire rising to create a cozy pocket. Owen's bed was larger than hers, covered in thick furs and wool blankets. He held one side open, and Kira slipped in, careful to stay on her side. Owen settled beside her, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body like a furnace. They lay in awkward silence for several minutes, both staring at the ceiling. "Thank you," Kira said finally, "for everything, for saving me." "I didn't save you," Owen replied quietly. "You saved yourself. I just gave you a place to land." Kira turned her head to look at him, finding him already watching her. In the dim light filtering up from the fire below, His face was all shadows and plains, but his eyes were gentle. "I don't think I've ever been happy before," she admitted. "Not really, not until I came here." "I know the feeling," Owen murmured. His hand, resting on the blanket between them, twitched, as if he wanted to reach for her but was holding himself back. "Kira, I need to tell you something." Her breath caught. "What?" "I didn't bring you here just for company," he said, the words coming slowly, carefully. "I mean, I did, but not just that. From the moment I saw you in that store, standing there invisible while everyone ignored you, I felt something. Recognition, yes, but also something else. Something I haven't felt in a long time, maybe ever. And these past months, living with you, learning with you, it's only gotten stronger. I think I'm falling in love with you, and I needed you to know, even if you don't feel the same way, even if this makes everything complicated." Kira's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "You love me?" "I think I do," Owen confirmed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I'm not what women dream about. I'm too rough, too big, too much of everything. But if you'd have me, if you could see past all that, I swear I'd spend every day of my life making sure you never felt invisible again." "Owen," Kira breathed, and then she was closing the distance between them, her hand finding his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw. "I've been in love with you for months. I was just too afraid to say anything." His eyes widened, and then he was pulling her close, his arms coming around her with careful strength, and Kira felt like she had finally come home. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, both of them half afraid this might be a dream. But then Owen's hand cupped the back of her head, and Kira pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something more urgent, more real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure?" he asked hoarsely. "About this? About me?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Kira replied, her fingers threading through his long hair. "You're everything I never knew I needed." They made love that night with the storm raging outside, finding warmth and connection and a sense of belonging that neither had ever experienced before. Owen was patient and careful with her, his strength tempered by gentleness, and Kira discovered that her body knew how to respond to him, how to move with him, how to bring them both to heights of pleasure that left them breathless and tangled together in the aftermath. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his broad chest, listening to the steady thunder of his heartbeat, Kira felt tears slip down her cheeks. Happy tears for once. "What's wrong?" Owen asked immediately, his hand stroking her hair. "Nothing," Kira said, laughing through her tears. "Nothing at all. I'm just happy. So happy I don't know what to do with it." Owen held her tighter, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Get used to it," he murmured, "because I plan on making you this happy every single day for the rest of our lives." The winter passed in a blur of contentment. Kira and Owen became not just lovers, but true partners, working together to maintain the homestead, to care for the animals, to survive the harsh mountain winter. They talked for hours, learning each other's minds as thoroughly as they had learned each other's bodies. Owen told her about his dreams of expanding the cabin, of maybe raising cattle in the high meadows during summer. Kira shared her secret wish to learn to read better, to have books, to fill her mind with knowledge that had been denied her for so long. "I'll teach you," Owen promised. "I have a few books up here, and next time we go to town, we'll buy more. You're smart, Kira. You deserve to have every opportunity to learn and grow." In late March, as the snow began to melt and the first signs of spring appeared, Owen took Kira's hand across the breakfast table and said, "Marry me." It was not a question, not really, but Kira answered anyway. Yes. 1,000 times yes. They rode down to Amarillo in early April, the journey taking only 2 days now that Kira was an experienced rider. The town looked smaller than Kira remembered, less intimidating. She clung to Owen's hand as they walked into the church and asked the pastor to marry them. Reverend Cooper looked between them with raised eyebrows. "Kira Montgomery," he said slowly. "We all thought you were dead. Or worse." "I'm very much alive," Kira replied calmly, "and I'd like to marry this man if you'll perform the ceremony." The Reverend hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and his disapproval, but in the end, duty won. He married them in a simple ceremony with 2 strangers pulled in from the street as witnesses. When Owen kissed his bride, Kira felt like she was sealing not just a marriage, but a whole new life, one where she was valued and loved and free. They emerged from the church to find a small crowd had gathered, drawn by rumors that the barn girl had returned. Among them stood Martha Wilson, her face pinched with displeasure. "So you came back," Martha said coldly. "I'm not surprised. Girls like you always end up in trouble." "I came back to get married," Kira replied evenly, "to the best man I've ever known, and I'm happier than you could possibly imagine." She did not wait for a response. Hand in hand with Owen, she walked to the general store, bought supplies including 3 precious books, and then they rode out of town without looking back. This time, Kira knew with absolute certainty that she would never return. This chapter of her life was closed forever. Back at the cabin, they settled into married life with easy grace. Spring turned to summer, and Kira thrived in the mountain air, her body growing strong from hard work, her spirit healing from years of neglect. Owen treated her like a queen, his queen, just as he had promised in the beginning. He built her a small greenhouse so she could grow herbs and vegetables, carved her a beautiful rocking chair for the porch, and spent countless evenings teaching her to read from his small collection of books. In turn, Kira made the cabin a home, adding small touches of comfort and beauty. She sewed curtains for the windows, planted flowers around the porch, and learned to cook the wild game Owen brought home in a dozen different ways. She also proved to be a natural with the horses, training them with a gentle hand that Owen admired. By late summer, Kira realized her monthly courses had not come in 2 months. She waited another week to be certain, and then one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she took Owen's hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Owen's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, fear, and finally pure joy. "A baby," he repeated, his voice choked. "We're going to have a baby?" "In the spring," Kira confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. "Are you happy?" Instead of answering, Owen swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his large hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Kira felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm terrified," Owen admitted, "and happier than I've ever been, both at the same time." "Me too," Kira whispered, "but we'll figure it out together, just like we've figured out everything else." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Owen became almost comically protective, insisting that Kira rest more, worry less, and let him handle most of the heavy chores. Kira protested at first, but eventually gave in, secretly touched by his concern. As her belly grew round with their child, Owen would spend long minutes with his hand resting on it, feeling the baby kick and move, wonder written across his rugged features. "Boy or girl?" he asked one night. "What do you think?" "I don't care," Kira replied honestly, "as long as the baby is healthy." "A boy would be good," Owen mused. "Someone to help with the ranch, to teach." "A girl would be good too," Kira countered. "Someone to show that women can be strong and capable, that they don't have to fit into narrow boxes." Owen grinned. "Either way, this kid is going to be lucky, because they'll have you as a mother." Kira went into labor on a bright morning in late March, just as the snow was beginning to melt for the second spring of their marriage. Owen, for all his strength and capability, turned pale when she gasped and grabbed his arm. "It's time," she managed through the contraction. "Time?" Owen repeated blankly, then his eyes went wide. "Time! Okay, what do I do?" Despite the pain, Kira laughed. "Boil water, get clean cloths, and try not to panic." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Owen stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring words of encouragement. When Kira was certain she could not endure another moment, when she was ready to give up, Owen leaned close and said fiercely, "You're the strongest person I know. You survived things that would have destroyed most people. You can do this. Our baby needs you. I need you. Push." And she did. With one final monumental effort, Kira brought their child into the world. The baby's cry filled the cabin, strong and lusty, and Owen's hands shook as he caught the infant, tears streaming down his face. "A boy," he said hoarsely, his voice breaking. "Kira, we have a son." He placed the baby on Kira's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, red, perfect face, overwhelmed by a love so fierce it took her breath away. This was her son, hers and Owen's, a new life created from their love and commitment. "He's beautiful," Kira whispered, tracing one finger down the baby's soft cheek. "What should we name him?" "What about Thomas?" Owen suggested. "After your father." Fresh tears spilled down Kira's cheeks. She had told Owen about her father during one of their long winter conversations, sharing memories she had thought long forgotten. That he remembered, that he wanted to honor that connection, meant more than she could express. "Thomas Blackthorne," she said, testing the name. "It's perfect." Owen bent and kissed her forehead, then kissed his son's tiny head with infinite gentleness. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for this, for everything, for being my family." The first year of Thomas's life flew by in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Owen proved to be a devoted father, rocking the baby for hours when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of constant wonder. Kira fell even deeper in love with her husband, watching him cradle their child in his massive arms with such care and tenderness. As Thomas grew into a chubby, active toddler, Kira and Owen settled into their roles as parents. They taught him to walk in the meadow behind the cabin, applauded his first words, and laughed at his attempts to help with chores. Owen carved him toys from wood, and Kira sewed him clothes from soft leather, and Thomas was surrounded by love at every moment. When Thomas was 2, Kira found herself pregnant again. This time, Owen was less panicked, though no less protective. The second pregnancy was easier than the first, and when Kira went into labor on a warm summer evening, she knew what to expect. Owen coached her through it with calm confidence, and their daughter was born just as the sun was rising, bathing the world in golden light. "What about Catherine?" Owen suggested, looking at the tiny girl in his arms. "We could call her Katie." "Catherine Blackthorne," Kira said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "Another perfect name." With 2 small children, life in the cabin became more chaotic but also richer, fuller. Thomas doted on his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. And Katie grew into a bright, curious child who followed her big brother everywhere. Owen expanded the cabin, adding another room so the children could have their own space, and Kira planted a larger garden to feed their growing family. The years passed peacefully. Occasionally, Owen would take supplies down to Amarillo or one of the other small towns to trade, and he always returned with stories of how the frontier was changing, becoming more settled and civilized. But up in their mountain clearing, life remained simple and good. When Thomas was 7 and Katie was 5, Owen came home from a trading trip with surprising news. "I ran into the new schoolteacher in town," he said, "a young woman from back east who wants to bring education to the frontier. She's looking for students." Kira and Owen looked at each other, an entire conversation passing between them in a glance. They had taught the children reading and basic arithmetic, but they both knew their own education was limited. The opportunity for Thomas and Katie to learn more was tempting. "It would mean spending time in town during the school year," Kira said slowly. "We'd have to rent a place, leave the cabin for months at a time." "Or we could build a house down there," Owen suggested. "Keep the cabin for summers and winters when we want to be alone. The kids need other children to play with, and you deserve to be part of a community, one that treats you with respect." It was a difficult decision, but ultimately they chose to do it. Owen built them a sturdy house on the outskirts of Amarillo, far enough from the town center to maintain privacy, but close enough for the children to attend school. The transition was strange at first, especially for Kira, who had sworn never to return to Amarillo. But she was not the same frightened girl who had left all those years ago. She was a confident woman, a loving mother, a skilled frontierswoman, and she carried herself with a pride that made people think twice before disrespecting her. It helped that Owen's reputation had grown over the years. He was known as fair but formidable, a man who kept to himself but would defend his family with frightening intensity. The townsfolk treated Kira with polite respect. Whether out of genuine regard or fear of her husband, Kira did not much care. Either way, it was better than how they had treated her before. Thomas and Katie thrived in school, soaking up knowledge like sponges. Thomas showed an aptitude for reading and writing, while Katie loved mathematics and science. They made friends, played with other children, and experienced a childhood filled with joy and security, everything Kira had been denied. In the evenings after the children were in bed, Kira and Owen would sit on the porch of their townhouse, holding hands and watching the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Owen asked one night. "This life? It's not what either of us planned." "I didn't have a plan," Kira replied. "I was just trying to survive. But this, us, our family, it's better than anything I could have dreamed. You made me a queen, Owen. You kept your promise." "You made yourself a queen," Owen corrected gently. "I just gave you a safe place to become who you always were inside. Strong, capable, worthy of love and respect." They still spent summers and winters at the mountain cabin, the whole family retreating to the wilderness they all loved. Those were Kira's favorite times, when it was just the four of them against the world, living simply and freely. Thomas learned to hunt and trap from his father, while Katie learned to gentle horses from her mother, and both children grew strong and confident in the mountain air. When Kira was 35 and Owen 38, with Thomas approaching his teenage years and Katie not far behind, Kira realized she was pregnant again. She and Owen stared at each other in shock, having assumed their family was complete, but the shock quickly gave way to excitement. One more child, one more chance to pour out the love that seemed to overflow from their lives. Their second son was born in the mountain cabin on a snowy November night, with Thomas and Katie waiting anxiously downstairs. Owen delivered the baby himself, his hands steady and sure. And when he placed the infant in Kira's arms, she saw that this child had Owen's gray eyes and her brown hair, a perfect blend of both of them. "James," Owen said, "if that suits you, my grandfather's name." "James Blackthorne," Kira agreed, smiling down at the baby. "Welcome to the family, little one." Thomas and Katie adored their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. James grew up surrounded by love and attention, the baby of the family, and he developed a cheerful, easygoing personality that brought light to every room he entered. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gentle soul that made him a favorite with everyone he met. At 20, he married a girl from town, a sweet-natured young woman named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into the Blackthorne family. They built a house near Owen and Kira's town home, and within 2 years, they made Kira and Owen grandparents for the first time. Katie chose a different path. At 18, she announced her intention to become a doctor, having apprenticed with the town physician and shown remarkable aptitude. It was an unusual choice for a woman, but Owen and Kira supported her completely, helping her travel back east to attend one of the few medical schools that accepted female students. She returned 5 years later with her degree and a determination to bring modern medicine to the frontier. James, the youngest, decided he wanted to be a rancher. He took over the mountain cabin and the surrounding land, expanding the operation to include cattle and more horses. At 23, he married a frontierswoman as tough and capable as his mother, and together they built a successful ranch that became known throughout the territory. Through it all, Owen and Kira remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with the marks of laughter and hard work, but their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, becoming something solid and enduring, tested by life and found unbreakable. On their 30th wedding anniversary, Owen and Kira returned to the mountain cabin alone, leaving their children and grandchildren behind in town. They sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same colors Kira associated with the night her father died, but now transformed into something beautiful. 30 years, Owen mused, seems like yesterday and forever ago at the same time. Best 30 years of my life, Kira said, squeezing his hand, even the hard parts. Do you remember what they used to say about you? Owen asked. That you had no manners? That you were raised in a barn? Kira laughed, the sound full and genuine. I remember. It bothered me so much back then. Now it seems ridiculous. What does it matter if I ate with my fingers or spoke too bluntly? Those things have nothing to do with a person's worth. Exactly, Owen agreed. And look at you now. 3 successful children, a community that respects you, a life filled with love and purpose. You built all of that, Kira. You took the raw material of your life and shaped it into something extraordinary. We built it, Kira corrected. Together. I couldn't have done any of this without you. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when no one else did. You raised me up to be your queen, just like you promised. Owen turned to look at her, his gray eyes still as sharp and clear as the day they met. You were always a queen, my love. You just needed someone to show you how to see it yourself. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, filling the sky with light. Inside the cabin, a fire crackled in the hearth, and the smell of pine filled the air. This place, this life, this love, it was everything Kira had never known she needed. "Do you think we'll have many more years?" Kira asked quietly. It was a thought that had been on her mind more frequently lately, the awareness that they were both growing older, that time was both infinite and fleeting. "I don't know," Owen replied honestly, "but however many we get, I want to spend every single one of them with you. Growing old with you is the greatest adventure of my life." Tears pricked Kira's eyes, happy tears, the only kind she cried anymore. "I love you, Owen Blackthorne, more than I have words to say." "I love you too, Kira Blackthorne, more than the mountains, more than the sky, more than anything in this world or the next." They went inside as the night grew cold, stoking the fire and climbing the ladder to the loft, to the bed where they had first confessed their love all those years ago. They made love slowly, savoring each touch and kiss, celebrating the bodies that had served them so well, that had created life and weathered hardship, and brought each other endless pleasure. Afterward, Kira lay in Owen's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving me a life worth living." "Thank you for sharing it with me," Owen replied, his arms tightening around her. "You're my greatest gift, Kira. Then, now, and always." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient dance. And in the cabin, Owen and Kira dreamed of all the days still to come, all the grandchildren yet to be born, all the sunsets yet to be watched from their porch. The years that followed were good ones, filled with the simple pleasures of family and community. Owen and Kira watched their grandchildren grow, passing on their wisdom and their stories, making sure the next generation understood where they came from and how hard their grandparents had fought to build this life. Thomas's children learned to read from books that once meant freedom to their grandmother. Katie's children learned medicine at their mother's side, carrying on her legacy of healing. James's children learned to work the land, to respect the wilderness, to live in harmony with nature rather than dominating it. When Owen was 65, he began to slow down, his body finally showing the wear of decades of hard labor. Kira, 62 herself, could see the changes in him, the way he moved more carefully, the occasional wince of pain. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for her never wavered. They spent more time in the townhouse now, the mountain winters too harsh for aging bodies, but every spring they still returned to the cabin for a few weeks, unable to stay away from the place where their love had first bloomed. It was on one of these spring visits, with wildflowers carpeting the meadow and the air sweet with pine and new growth, that Owen had a heart attack. Kira was with him when it happened, and she held him as he gasped for breath, his face going gray. She screamed for help, but they were alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, and she knew with terrible certainty that this was the moment she had been dreading. "Owen," she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap, "don't leave me, please don't leave me." "Never," he managed, his hand finding hers and gripping with surprising strength. "I'll never leave you, Kira. Even when I'm gone, I'll still be here, in the cabin, in the mountains, in our children, in you." "I can't do this without you," Kira cried, her tears falling on his face. "Yes, you can," Owen said, his voice fading. "You're the strongest person I know. You'll survive this like you've survived everything else. And when it's your time, I'll be waiting. I promise. I'll be waiting, and we'll be together again." "I love you," Kira whispered desperately. "I love you so much." "I know," Owen breathed, his eyes locked on hers. "Best thing I ever did was ask you to dance. Best decision I ever made was bringing you home. You made my life complete, Kira. Thank you. Thank you for everything." His eyes closed, and his hand went slack in hers, and Kira felt the moment his spirit left his body, felt the awful emptiness where his presence had been. She held him and wept, her cries echoing through the mountains they had both loved, her heart breaking into pieces. Eventually, she managed to get his body onto his horse and lead it down to town. The journey took hours, and by the time she arrived, the whole community had heard the news. Owen Blackthorne, the mountain man who had built a legacy of strength and honor, was dead. The funeral was the largest Amarillo had ever seen. People came from all over the territory, drawn by respect for the man who had lived by his own code and never compromised his principles. Thomas, Katie, and James stood with their mother, their own faces streaked with tears, as their father was laid to rest in the town cemetery under a spreading oak. In the weeks that followed, Kira moved through her grief like a sleepwalker. Her children urged her to stay in town, to let them care for her, but she needed the mountains, needed the cabin where Owen's presence was strongest. She returned to their home and spent long days sitting on the porch, remembering, grieving, slowly learning to live with the enormous hole in her heart. But as the months passed, Kira found that Owen had been right. She could survive this. The love they had shared had not died with him. It lived on in their children, in their grandchildren, in the community they had built together. It lived on in Kira herself, in the strength and confidence Owen had helped her discover, in the knowledge that she was worthy of love and respect. She began to heal, not quickly and never completely, but enough to find joy again in small things, the laughter of grandchildren, the beauty of a mountain sunset, the satisfaction of a garden well tended. She told stories about Owen to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, making sure he was not forgotten. When Kira was 73, she woke one morning feeling different, lighter somehow. She dressed carefully in her best dress and walked slowly to the cemetery, placing fresh flowers on Owen's grave as she did every week. But this time, she lingered longer, talking to him as if he could hear. "I'm tired, my love," she said softly. "I've lived a good life, but I'm ready to rest now. The children are settled, the grandchildren are grown, and I've done everything I set out to do. I think it's time to come home to you." That night, Kira lay down in the loft of the cabin, in the bed she had shared with Owen for so many years. She closed her eyes and felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. And as she drifted off to sleep for the last time, she could have sworn she felt strong arms around her, could have sworn she heard a deep voice murmur, "Welcome home, my queen. I've been waiting for you." They found her the next morning, Thomas and Katie and James, come to check on their mother. She looked peaceful, a slight smile on her face, her body finally at rest after a long and remarkable life. They buried her next to Owen, and the entire town turned out to pay their respects to the woman who had transformed herself from an outcast into a beloved matriarch. At the funeral, Thomas stood to speak, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother used to tell us about the girl she was before she met our father, a girl people said had no manners, who was raised in a barn, who was worth nothing. But our father saw the truth. He saw strength and intelligence and a heart bigger than the whole territory. He raised her up to be his queen, and she became a queen to all of us. She taught us that where you come from doesn't matter as much as where you're going. She taught us that family is what you build, not just what you're born into. She taught us that love, real love, can heal even the deepest wounds and transform lives. We will miss her every day, but we will honor her by living the way she taught us, to live with courage, with compassion, and with the unshakable belief that every person has value, no matter what anyone else says." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, 3 generations of Blackthorns gathered at the mountain cabin. They sat on the porch and told stories late into the night, keeping the memories of Owen and Kira alive, passing on the legacy of 2 outcasts who had found each other and built something extraordinary from nothing but love and determination. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the pines, visitors to the cabin swore they could hear laughter and see the shadows of 2 figures holding hands on the porch, well, the Blackthorne family just smiled. They knew that some loves were too strong to be contained by death, that some stories never really ended, that Owen and Kira were together still, watching over the family they had created, the legacy they had built, the proof that one act of kindness, one moment of seeing another person's true worth, could change everything. The cabin still stands today, maintained by the Blackthorne descendants, a monument to a love story that began with a dance and ended only when death briefly separated two souls who had always been meant to find each other. People come from miles around to see it, to hear the story of the mountain man and the barn girl, the outcast and the queen, two people who proved that your past does not define your future, that love can conquer even the cruelest circumstances, and that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple question asked across a crowded room. Would you like to dance?